Hi guys. So what I'm going to do for social studies is read a book out loud, which I usually do in April anyway. And the book I chose is one that I know you guys usually like. It's a What Is, and what we're going to talk about is what is the Declaration of Independence. So I'm going to read chapter 1 today, and then each day I will add a new chapter. So chapter 1. What is the Declaration of Independence? June 26, 1776, Philadelphia. The June heat in Philadelphia was blistering. Even before the sun came up, it was hot. Thomas Jefferson of Virginia did his best to stay cool as he wrote in the room he had rented on Market Street. He was writing a letter, but it was no ordinary letter. Along with Jefferson, important men from all 13 American colonies had come to Philadelphia. They planned to do something brave and dangerous. The colonies were declaring their freedom from Great Britain. They were going to create a new country, the United States of America. If you remember from the first quarter, we talked about how hot it was when they were writing the Declaration of Independence. So this is a little bit of a review. Thomas Jefferson was chosen to write a public letter to the British king listing all the reasons why people in America were rebelling. Jefferson also wanted the letter to show other countries in Europe why this was the right decision for America. It took Jefferson, with help from the others, only a couple of weeks to finish one of the most important documents in history, the Declaration of Independence. Sending an announcement like this, a declaration, meant that the colonists in America would go to war. The British Army was large and powerful. The colonists didn't even have an army. The chances were slim that the Americans could win. Many would certainly die. And even if by some chance the colonists did win their freedom, could 13 different colonies create a new country together? For 2 weeks, Jefferson worked on the Declaration of Independence. He sat at the small desk that he made by hand. He wrote in ink on large sheets of paper with his quill pen. Each day, Jefferson would discuss the ideas for the Declaration with some of the other men who had gathered in Philadelphia. After these talks, Jefferson would sometimes tear up his most recent draft of the Declaration and start over. He wanted to get every word just right. The Declaration had to explain more than why the colonies could no longer live under British rule. More importantly, it had to tell the world what this new country hoped to stand for. It would not have a king. It would set up a government in which ordinary men decided the laws. After the Declaration of Independence was finished, it was signed on July 4th, 1776. It has become one of the most important statements of freedom. It has inspired people around the globe to fight for their freedom as well. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." This meant that this new United States would treat everyone the same. Jefferson may not have realized how powerful those simple words would be for hundreds of years to come. There's a side note here. It says, "We're all men created equal." If we think back to what we learned in the fall, in September when we started social studies, we know the answer to that back then not all men were created equal. Jefferson's famous phrase about all men being created equal didn't hold true in the American colonies. In 1776, there were about 500,000 African slaves belonging to white colonists. Jefferson himself owned slaves. So did many of the other men who signed the Declaration of Independence. In his first version of the Declaration, Jefferson included anti-slavery language. But too many of the signers didn't want to end slavery, so there is no mention of it. Jefferson did free a few of his slaves. So did many of the other men who signed the Declaration of Independence. So that was the introduction. Now I'm going to read chapter 1. A Battle for America. After Columbus set foot in the New World in 1492, many European countries wanted to rule different parts of North America. Great Britain, France, and Spain controlled almost the entire continent. Great Britain had 13 colonies along the East Coast. where most settlers lived. France, Great Britain's great rival, had the largest area of land north and west of the colonies. But not many settlers lived there. Same with Spain, it had a bigger chunk of land than Great Britain, but with far fewer people. This map shows what land belonged to France, Great Britain, and Spain. The striped area were regions that different countries claimed to own. So if you see, France has a very large portion. The striped part, they kind of didn't have an idea of who really owned that. The dark area was all that Great Britain owned. In 1754, Great Britain tried to grab more of North America by invading lands controlled by the French. This led to a war known as the French and Indian War. A young lieutenant colonel named George Washington served in the British Army fighting against the French. Most American colonists wanted Great Britain to win the war with France, and after many years, it did. Great Britain doubled the area of land it controlled. So if you look here, this is the before and after pictures of the area of land that Great Britain had before the war, and then after the war, how much more they got. During the war, many British soldiers were sent to America to fight. That had been very costly. King George III had to borrow massive amounts of money from other countries. After winning the war, King George III had to pay back what he owed. In the king's mind, he had been defending the American colonists against the French, so he expected the colonies to help with the war debt. This angered people in America. It wasn't the colonists' idea to start the war. It had been fought because the king wanted more land. So why should Americans have to pay? So the colonists felt that the king was being greedy, trying to get more land, and the king felt that he was defending the colonists from the Indians and the French. So who was going to pay? Here's a little side note on George Washington. George Washington, British soldier. The son of a successful Virginia farmer, George Washington was only 22 years old when he led 150 British soldiers against French troops along the Ohio River. This was at the very beginning of the French and Indian War. His troops were defeated by the French army, and Washington had to surrender. He was ashamed. A year later, Washington returned to the same area to fight, and once again the French overpowered his forces. Washington had 2 horses shot from underneath him. The best he could do was lead the defeated British soldiers back to safety. Although praised for his bravery in the war, Washington retired from the British Army in 1758. He returned to his farm in Virginia. However, 17 years later, Washington became commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Now he was fighting against Great Britain. There's a picture of George Washington. King George III didn't listen to that argument. Remember, they said that they thought he was fighting for more land and they shouldn't have to pay, but he didn't agree with that. The British government, called Parliament, taxed the American colonists heavily to pay for the war debts. The American colonists had no one representing them in Parliament. It met in London, more than 3,000 miles away and across the Atlantic Ocean. The colonists had no way to argue against the high taxes. And here's a building where Parliament would meet. It's called St. Stephen's Chapel. Did Parliament decide on all laws governing the colonies? No. There were local governments with men elected by their fellow colonists, much like we have today. In Virginia, for example, there was the House of Burgesses. However, none of these groups had much power. In each colony, a royal governor made all the important decisions. Whatever the governor decided should be the law was the law, and he was appointed by the king. So Great Britain always had the final say about all laws and taxes. This got people in the colonies angry, very angry. Okay, we're going to stop there. Tomorrow we will read about chapter 2. I'm going to put a link underneath here for you to go and answer some questions on chapter 1 in Google Forms and submit to me. I hope you're all staying healthy and safe. I miss you. If you get a chance, send me a message. See you soon.